there, and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In today's episode, I welcome a very special guest, Alexis Smith, to the podcast. She joins me from her home in Utah. Alexis's story started when she developed disordered eating and an unhealthy mindset in 2015. In 2017, this developed into a full-blown eating disorder. On October 9th, she was formally diagnosed with anorexia. She was admitted to Primary Children's Hospital where she received an NG feeding tube. She was discharged from the hospital 6 days later, but little did she know that she would have this tube up her nose, down her throat, and into her stomach for the following 4 months. On the podcast, Alexis shares her story, her toolbox, the support that she had during her time of recovery, and her full recovery journey. Now a healthy young lady, Alexis has started to advocate for eating disorder recovery and awareness through speaking about her experiences, and we are lucky enough to have her join us today. She's currently studying psychology at Utah Valley University and hopes to obtain a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. She is such a delight and an inspiration, and I had so much fun speaking to her on the podcast. It was a pleasure to have her with me, and I know that you will also love her. If you ever had an eating disorder or know of a loved one who has gone through or is going through an eating disorder and recovery, then this is the episode for you. Enjoy the episode, and a special thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Please comment on Facebook and Instagram and let me know what you think of this episode. Stay tuned, and as always, keep listening. So, hi Alexis, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that we finally get to sit down because we had such a great chat when we met a couple of weeks ago. And I think your story is interesting, and I think it's a perfect place for you to share it. I'm happy to help with advocacy if I can.
Thank you. I mean, that's kind of what my life has turned into. My life was so consumed by an eating disorder, and now it's so consumed with advocacy. So
let's start by you telling the audience a bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Alexis Smith, and long story short, I was officially diagnosed with anorexia at the age of 15. This was in 2017. And growing up, I always was very perfectionistic. I was always very academic and athletic. And then there came a point where a lot of depression and anxiety started to settle in right around 7th grade. Around 9th grade, I decided to start being healthier. I just decided, you know what, I want to live a healthy lifestyle, implement the things that I've learned in my health classes. I just want to have a happy, healthy life. And so I did that. And it wasn't very specific. I was just going to do that by eating better and exercising more. And so everything was very rational. It was very reasonable, very healthy. And slowly but surely, things kind of started to spiral out of control. I became obsessed with health. I became obsessed with tracking. I became a compulsive exerciser. Just all of these things that we now know is called orthorexia. And what orthorexia is literally an unhealthy obsession with health. And so it kind of goes the opposite direction. And orthorexia is not an official diagnosis that's in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So I was diagnosed with anorexia in October of 2017. This is my sophomore year of high school. And I was immediately admitted to Primary Children's Hospital, which is here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was there for 6 days. After those 6 days stay in primaries, I wasn't sure how long I was going to be there, but it ended up being 6 days. I was discharged with an NG feeding tube. So this feeding tube went up my nose and then down my throat and into my stomach. And
oh my gosh. And they send you home like that?
Yes.
Oh no.
Little did I know that I'd have that feeding tube for the next 4 months. So 24/7, I had that feeding tube on Christmas morning. I went to school with it.
Back up. Why did they give you a feeding tube?
So they gave me a feeding tube so that I would have extra nourishment. The hard thing about an eating disorder is that you have to fix the body before you can fix the brain. And my mind and my body were so incredibly malnourished. And at the time, I hated having a feeding tube. It was miserable, but I am so incredibly grateful for it. Not everyone in eating disorder has that in eating disorder recovery. That was unique to my circumstances. That's not always the case. For me, it was necessary, and as difficult as it was, I'm so grateful for it because I was able to recover faster and have a fuller recovery. So it's very hopeful. A feeding tube is hard. It's the feelings in your body and the mind it's just a difficult thing to cope with and to manage, but I'm so grateful for that. And for anyone that's in eating disorder recovery or considering getting recovery, they should not be scared of that. It's not necessarily something that you're going to experience. If it is, it's something that you can talk about with your doctors and see what alternatives. I mean, there's options, and so don't be horrifically scared of that. But for me, that was what was best.
So I was going to ask, right? So you had this obsession with tracking everything,
Mhm.
and you did this for, I would say, a long period of time. So at what point did the people around you start to notice that there was something wrong?
Yeah, so I was pretty good at it. I'm going to be honest. I was pretty good at keeping it a secret and doing it just kind of on my own time. And so they didn't really start to notice. I was diagnosed in October. They didn't really start to notice until late August or early September. So about a month or two before I was diagnosed. And at this point, I had had an eating disorder for several months. So it took a while. I was aware of what was going on. I think they were suspicious before they figured out what was really going on, before they kind of, oh, the light bulb went off and was like, oh, okay, this is really what's happening. But yeah, for me, my eating disorder was short. I had a short eating disorder, which is amazing and is hopeful. And unfortunately, not everyone can say that. Some people struggle for years, for decades, for a lifetime. But I think my story really brings that hope that says, you know what, you don't have to struggle. You don't have to struggle forever. It might take longer than mine did, and that's okay. However long it takes, it's still worth it. And that full recovery is so incredibly real and it's so incredibly worth it that that's what you're striving for.
Yeah. You were talking about how you were so good at hiding it. Tell us, what were some of the things that you were doing? And I'm asking you this because for people who are listening, the family members, what should they be looking out for?
For me, it was just very like discreet, and I never openly like lied about anything. Like, for example, if my mom would say, "Hey, what did you eat for lunch?" I would say, "I packed a sandwich, this." And then so I would say I packed it, but I didn't necessarily eat it. So it was just very deceiving. But I never was openly like really rebellious about it. Um, so I think, but the key there is for family members to watch out, family members and friends, just loved ones, to watch out for anything that's abnormal. Just keep an eye out because even when there's so many different eating disorders, and so it's not necessarily going to look like the same thing for everyone. Look for anything abnormal surrounding food, surrounding relationships with food, relationship with exercise. If they're suddenly doing a lot with exercise that they haven't in the past, they're joining teams that they haven't in the past, they are weighing themselves more often, they are being obsessed with food, looking at recipes, counting calories, asking for fitness trackers, all of these different things. I mean, even with other eating disorders, if they're super picky about which textures of food that they're eating, or if they're making routine bathroom trips after meals, there's just a variety of different signs and symptoms. But the key is to be aware of anything abnormal. you should recognize that. In most cases, if there's anything extremely abnormal, you'll probably go, okay, what the heck is going on? And that's when you need to go, okay, hold on. What is going on and what do we need to do about it?
Yeah. No, those are some really excellent pointers. It took the time for your family to really discover that you were in trouble. But what did your rock bottom look like before you were admitted to the hospital?
So I would honestly say that rock bottom was after I was admitted. The night before, I had a conversation with my mom, and I knew we were going to the doctors the next morning. I knew what they would tell me. I knew that they would tell me that I had an eating disorder. Did not expect to go to the hospital. And my mom came down, and I do not remember what was said. I remember her asking me she said, Lexi, are we dealing with an eating disorder? And I just nodded my head because I was sobbing on her lap on the floor. And it was the most hopeful conversation I think I've ever been a part of, because for me, my world was just crashing down. And she said to me, you know what, however long this takes, however much money it costs, whatever resources we have to use, whatever we have to do, we will do it to get you better. And to me, that was so incredibly helpful. And I went to bed that night and I slept so good. I slept so good just knowing that, you know what, it was genuinely going to work out. It was genuinely going to be okay. And then the next morning,
No judgment.
I went to school.
Yeah. Yeah, there was no judgment. There was just love.
Yes. And at the time, my mom didn't know anything about eating disorders. She didn't know. I mean, my parents had as much education as the average person does, which is very little. And they've learned a lot throughout this process with me, but so loving and so accepting and so willing to understand that this was a medical and mental issue that needed to have help and treatment. And so they were willing to help me with that. And then after I was diagnosed, going to the hospital really shocked me. And honestly, I wouldn't even say that was rock bottom. I would say that it was several weeks after that where recovery was just so mundane. Going to school with a feeding tube was exhausting. I was mentally and physically just burned out. And I often say it took every ounce of strength I could find inside myself. And I had to dig for that strength every single day. And I was just exhausted. I was miserable. I remember crying on the floor, not wanting to go to school. I mean, I was distraught.
But that must have been so difficult, being the girl
right.
eating tube in school.
Right. And so that was probably rock bottom. It was several weeks or months after I was diagnosed. And I think that the reason I tell you that is not to scare you away from recovery, because recovery is so worth it. It is. And you don't believe me, like those that are listening that have an eating disorder, they won't believe me when I say that now, but I promise you, I've been where they are. It's so worth it. But you have to understand that recovery is not linear. It doesn't look the same for everyone, and that it's up and down, back and forth all the time. And you have to buckle up and ride the roller coaster until you can get to a point of full recovery.
Yeah. And that is so true. That is so true of healing in general. It is a roller coaster, and every day is different from the other.
Yes. And I mean, there are so many different factors that play into it. You never know. And you don't know how long it's going to take. So you keep going and you hold on to any hope that you can find. You get whatever resources you need. I mean, for me, there was a lot of depression after my diagnosis as well, because that was something that was kind of underlying my eating disorder. So that really started to show itself, and even like some suicidal ideation. And I had to get whatever help I needed for that. And the most important thing in my life right then was not school. It was not my relationships. It was recovery.
Yeah. And I wanted actually to ask and talk to you about this, what does that toolkit look like? Because you're talking about all of this help and assistance that you had during this period of recovery. But what did that toolkit look like?
So I was discharged from the hospital with a recovery team. So those were my main tools. Is I had a pediatrician that kind of oversaw everything. I had a dietitian that helped with all of my meal plans, getting me renourished and helping heal a relationship with food. Then I had a therapist, and both my dietitian and my therapist were specialized in eating disorder treatment. And the therapist kind of helped with all of the mental side of that. And then along with that, I was blessed with a very supportive support system. I had great friends and great family. And I was given I had the opportunity to reach out to those resources, which not everyone does. And I'm very aware of that. And my heart goes out to those individuals, but to those that don't have those three key factors in their toolbox, recovery is still possible. Don't you dare give up just because you don't have those specific tools. But there were other things that I had to put in my toolbox throughout the process. I had to learn coping skills. I had to learn to uncover what was under my eating disorder, which for me, I said before, was a lot of depression and a lot of perfectionism, toxic perfectionism. And so I had to go through that process as well. I had to find coping skills of just things to kind of quiet my mind, calm my brain, and learn how to take care of myself. I had to put tools in my toolbox to prevent certain things from happening. So, for example, I do not weigh myself. I don't weigh myself anymore. I have no idea how much I weigh. I don't track calories. I don't track macros. I don't track water intake. I don't track my exercise. So those are kind of precautionary things that I do. And I indulge myself in resources, reading books, listening to podcasts, listening to healthy things that I thought would help that weren't triggering. And so those were all kind of things that my toolbox obtained. And still to this day, my toolbox is growing. And because I've learned that my mental health story is not over. I may be completely healed from an eating disorder, and that's not something that I struggle with at all, period. A lot of people will say that it's just a matter of like muting the voice, just kind of turning down the voice so it's a less volume. And I say, yeah, that's very true. But mine's on mute. It's on mute. I think that's a fine analogy, but you have to understand that mute is an option and it doesn't have to be there. And that's where mine is at. But still, I struggle with perfectionism. I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with depression. And that's just part of the reality of life. That's part of being a mortal human being. And I've learned that for me, I think my mental health is something I have to focus on a little more than I think the average human does. Everybody has mental health. And some people's are a little bit more tricky than others. And I'm one of those people. And so it's something I have to be consciously aware of. And I will have to be aware of that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that.
It's true.
I'm fine with that. And I've learned to be kind to my mind. I've learned to give myself grace. I've learned to look at my body as an instrument, not an ornament. I've learned to reach out for help. I've learned what my strengths are and what my weaknesses are and what I can see coming and recognize those things and reach out when I need to and to reach into my toolbox and to find those things. So it's not over for me. My toolbox continues to grow.
And I think that is so true for healing in general, is that it never ends. We constantly grow, we constantly evolve, but I'm glad that you get to switch on that mute button and actually work on the underlying issues that originally caused the eating disorder.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of individuals they'll be like, you know what, your eating disorder will always be there. It's a chronic illness. And that scared me because I thought I'd be branded with the stigma of mental illness for the rest of my life. And I learned that that's not the case. I had a therapist that was very hopeful and fought eating disorders very aggressively. So anything but full recovery was not an option. And I learned that I don't have to struggle for the rest of my life. I haven't struggled for years. I haven't had an eating disorder thought for years. I don't care how much I weigh, if I'm being honest. I don't worry about the foods I eat. And I think a lot of individuals in recovery are thinking that's too good to be true. And it's not. it's a reality. If I could put you in my life and let you see it for a day or a week, you would go, oh my gosh, recovery is so incredibly real. It's so incredibly possible, and it's so
Yeah.
incredibly worth it. And I can't emphasize that enough, because when I was there, I was so stubborn. I was so ignorant. I was so unwilling, and I was a difficult patient. But I mean, so I'm trying to think of where those individuals might be, and if they're listening to this, they're probably going, who is this lady? Like, what does she think she's talking about? She doesn't understand. She doesn't know. What about this in my situation? Or what about this? Or she never experienced this thing. I
Yeah.
might not have done everything to your experience, but I do know where your mind is, and I know where your body is, and I know where it could be. And I don't wish anything less than full recovery upon anyone.
No, that's fantastic. No, you've got an inspiring story. And I think each person's story is different. And I think for the listeners, they will take the part from your story that applies to them, you know?
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
And I hope they do.
so I'm interested to know what your relationship with food is like now.
Yeah. So my relationship with food it's really quite wonderful. I don't like meal plan. I don't meal prep. I don't count calories. I don't portion sizes, nothing like that. I just am a very intuitive eater. And so that looks like it's different every day. So that's why I never really show people like what I eat in a day, because it's just different all the time. So usually I'll wake up. I usually have 3 meals a day and 2 or 3 snacks in there.
Whereas
A good
before, you would have those meals, but you wouldn't really eat them.
Yes. I always had 3 meals a day when I had an eating disorder. I don't know if they can really be called meals. I ate
Yeah.
3 times a day. So
Just to
yeah, it looks a
appease
lot.
those around you, not to arise suspicion.
Yes, it was difficult, but now my relationship with food is so wonderful. And so I'll have 3 meals a day, a few snacks, treats when I want to. I mean, if I'm being honest, I probably eat treats every day. I probably have a scoop of cookie dough, or a thing of ice cream, or some candy. And yesterday I had all of the above, and it's just different. It's
Good for
just
you.
different. And then, I mean, I'll eat salads for lunch. Sometimes I'll have pizza for lunch. Sometimes it'll be, something really nutritious, quote unquote nutritious, and something that's not. And my body just rolls with the punches, and it works itself out, and it all balances out. And I think the key to my relationship with food right now is variety. I make sure that I'm
Yes.
eating, okay, you know what, let's get some protein. I need to be more awake in the afternoons instead of falling asleep. Okay, you know what?
Yes.
The fruit, that sounds really good to me right now. Let's eat some fruit. You know what? It's my birthday. Great. Let's have 3 pieces of cake. Fantastic. My body will make up the difference for that. It'll figure
Yeah.
itself out. Nothing horrible is going to happen to me overnight. And my most feared food used to be Pop-Tarts. I don't know why. I don't know why, but
They're so high
they
in
were
calories.
they were
That's
my
why.
worst. They were my most feared food of anything. And now I always have Pop-Tarts in my pantry. I don't eat them every
Lovely.
morning, but I mean, at least once a week, probably I'll pull out a Pop-Tart and stick it in the microwave and eat a Pop-Tart,
Yeah.
and not only that, but I'll have it with yogurt or cottage cheese, or a cheese stick and fruit snacks or whatever. I mean, my relationship with food is just so intuitive. And I don't want to say it's normal, because what is normal?
Yes.
But it's so intuitive. I've gone back to the biological way of eating, listening to my hunger, stopping when I'm full, including nutrition, including sometimes emotional eating, and that's okay. Just really going back to those principles of intuitive eating, including movement in my lifestyle, intuitive movement when I want to move my body, just because it feels good, because it relieves stress, because I want to, and it's so beautiful.
Yes. I know that you've taken your experience and you have transformed it into something positive in your life. So,
Yes.
after overcoming your experiences, tell me, why did you choose advocacy as a medium to create awareness and shine the light on the eating disorders?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people that go through eating disorder recovery choose not to get into a lot of advocacy, and that's fine. If you just kind of want your eating disorder to be a thing of the past and you're over and you're done with it, great. That's what full recovery is for. But for me, I just felt really drawn to advocacy. At the time, I really wanted something to replace my eating disorder with because now I had so much time because I wasn't seeing a therapist all the time. I wasn't going to a pediatrician. I wasn't seeing a dietitian every week. I mean, I had so much time. And so I was like, what in the world am I going to do with myself? And advocacy just really sounded like a passion to me. I was mad at my eating disorder for all that it had taken from me, and I was ready to share hope and to share encouragement. And so I started to get into advocacy, like through the National Eating Disorder Association, doing walks, doing legislative events. I started to raise awareness and raise research, like critical research money, getting on Instagram, so showing up, spreading awareness, sharing my story to youth groups, doing motivational speaking, creating a recovery workbook, and self-publishing that, starting a podcast. I mean, start just this roller coaster of eating disorder turned into a roller coaster of advocacy, and I've loved every minute of it. But I think for anyone, they can do as much or as little advocacy as they want. The eating disorder community is one of the most accepting communities. I mean, they kind of took me as I was without any questions asked and accepted me into their community regardless of my situation and said, you know, if you've struggled, great, we'd love to have you here. If you haven't struggled, great, we love to have you here. If you know someone that struggles, great, we need you. If you haven't and you're just someone who's here to spread awareness, we need you too. So they kind of took me as I was, no questions asked, and loved me into their community. And like I said, as much or as little advocacy as you want, whatever awareness you can spread, great. That's what we need. And so for me, I just felt like it was a passion and it was really a purpose of mine. I had this taste of an eating disorder, and now I was going to spend the rest of my life helping to treat them. I was always drawn to like the social sciences, and so that just kind of narrowed down my career field for me. So I'm now a psychology major, and about a year from now, I'll start applying to graduate programs for a clinical mental health counseling program. So clinical mental health counseling, and then going into like therapy, starting my own practice way down the road from now. And really just, I mean, it'll be the rest of my life doing advocacy and treatment for eating disorders. And I think what's hopeful to those that are in recovery is that if recovery wasn't real and if recovery wasn't worth it, there wouldn't be recovered people out there. And there wouldn't be people that devote the rest of their lives to it. I mean, I would absolutely love to be careerless if I could. If eating disorders, like I would love to be worked out of a career because that's the ultimate goal is to get people into the office and then out so that they never have to see me again.
You want them
I
to
think
completely outgrow you.
Yes. Yeah. That's the goal, is to work myself out of a job. And I'm happy to do that. I'm more than happy. That's ultimately what I want for them. And I don't even know them. I don't even know them yet. And my heart goes out to them. And I remember where I was, and I remember those sleepless, tear-filled nights and the dreadful mornings and the difficult afternoons and terror-filled evenings. And I mean, I just remember, and I can go back and sit with those feelings. But I think what's even more important is the fact that I am recovered and that can just show people what is possible for them.
I love your passion. And I
Thank
think,
you.
I mean, as a survivor of an eating disorder, you're an inspiration for others. I love how passionate you are about this and about making a career, educating and helping others. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
So, Alexis, tell me, for anyone that wants to get involved with your advocacy group or who would like to follow along on your journey, where can they find you? And also your podcast. I love your podcast, by the way. I've listened to quite a few of your episodes. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, the main hub of everything I do is on Instagram. So everything is linked there. You can find my website there as well. It's at everyounce.of-strength. So that's kind of the main place to kind of go and visit. And then you can also find my podcast, which is the Every Ounce Podcast. And that's available really wherever podcasts are listened to. So Apple, Spotify, Google, Anchor, wherever. And then everything, like my website and everything else, is also linked there. So you can just kind of find it in the show notes. You can find my Instagram. Those are the main places.
Perfect. In conclusion, do you have any last words of inspiration for the audience?
Oh, I always have last words of inspiration. I think my takeaway is kind of, it's very simple. It's one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given. And it was right before I was literally on the drive to the hospital with my mom, and we stopped by my dad's work. And he obviously knew. My mom had told him what had just happened and where we were going and everything. And I'm really close with my dad, and we rolled up and he came outside and he was on my side of the driver's door, and the window rolled down, and I didn't even want to look at him. I was embarrassed and I was ashamed and I was just overwhelmed. And he said, "Lex, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself." And that's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given. To take care of yourself, take care of your mind, take care of your body, take care of your soul, to be kind to your mind, to give yourself grace, to cut yourself some freaking slack. You're doing better than you think you are. And life is hard. It's rough, but it's also so incredibly good and beautiful. And navigating that is possible. So I think I just want to leave with a message of hope is really what I want to instill in listeners.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Thank you. I'm sure that my listeners are going to just absolutely eat this up.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yes, no, definitely. Oh, Lexi, I'm so happy that you made the time to come and join me today. I am happy that my listeners can benefit from, your experiences, your toolbox, all of the great advice that you've given here today. And I always say together, we are stronger. As survivors, we are stronger. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Take care.
Thank you. Have a good one.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.